Your soulmate was not looking for answers about you when they heard those words. They were simply in the wrong place at the right moment, and then suddenly your name entered a conversation that changed everything they thought they knew. At first, they may not have even paid attention. Maybe they only heard a few words while passing by. Maybe they were not supposed to be listening at all. But then something was said about you, and their entire focus changed. They stopped. They listened, and the more they heard, the more they realized that this was not the story they had been carrying about you. For a long time, your soulmate may have believed they understood why you became distant. They may have thought you stopped caring, moved on, or simply decided that the connection between you no longer mattered. Maybe they convinced themselves that your silence was an answer. Maybe they believed you had forgotten them, while they were still secretly thinking about what happened between you. But then they overheard something that did not fit the version of you they had created in their mind. Someone mentioned what you had really been going through. Someone revealed a detail about your life, your feelings, or the reason you had changed that your soulmate was never supposed to know. And suddenly, the past began to look different. Imagine walking through a hallway and accidentally hearing a conversation behind a door that explains something you have been confused about for years. You were never meant to hear it, but once the words reach you, you cannot pretend you did not hear them. That may be exactly what happened to your soulmate. They may now be replaying every word, every pause, every detail that was revealed about you. They may be wondering how long this truth existed without them knowing. They may be asking themselves who else knew what was happening while they were creating their own explanation for your behavior. And the most shocking part is that the conversation may have revealed something about you that completely contradicts what they believed. Maybe they learned that you were hurting more than you showed. Maybe they discovered that you had never truly stopped caring. Maybe they heard that you were dealing with something privately and that your distance had a reason you never knew how to explain. Whatever the truth was, it forced your soulmate to question the story they had accepted for far too long. Because sometimes one overheard conversation can reveal more than years of silence. And now, your soulmate may be realizing that the person they thought they understood was only a small part of the real story. But what they heard next may have been the detail that truly shook them, because it did not just explain why you became distant. It revealed what you were secretly feeling about them, while they believed you had already let go. And now your soulmate is beginning to realize that what they overheard was not just a random conversation. The words may have sounded ordinary to everyone else, but to them, every sentence carried a completely different meaning. Someone was talking about your past, your situation, or something you had been dealing with, and suddenly your soulmate heard a detail that made them stop thinking about everything else. Maybe the person said, "I thought you already knew." Maybe they mentioned something that happened during the exact period when your soulmate believed you were simply ignoring them. Maybe they revealed that you were going through something privately, something that had changed the way you behaved, the way you communicated, and the way you connected with people. And the moment your soulmate realized they had never known about it, a painful question began forming inside them. How could they have been so close to you and still know so little about what you were actually experiencing? For a long time, they may have believed your silence was a clear message. They may have thought you were choosing not to respond, choosing not to explain, choosing not to fight for the connection. But now they are beginning to understand that they may have been looking at the result without ever seeing the cause. Imagine finding one missing piece of a puzzle after staring at the wrong picture for years. The piece may be small, but suddenly the entire image begins to change. That is what this revelation may have done to your soulmate. They are now looking back at your behavior and asking different questions. Why did you become so distant during that specific time? Why did your energy change? Why did you stop explaining yourself? Why did you seem like you were carrying something you never wanted anyone to see? And perhaps the most painful question is why nobody told them. Maybe someone knew what you were going through. Maybe people around you understood parts of your situation, while your soulmate was left believing something completely different. They may now feel confused, hurt, and even angry, because they are realizing that the story they believed about you was incomplete from the beginning. They may have thought you were cold, but now they are wondering if you were exhausted. They may have thought you were rejecting them, but now they are wondering if you were simply unable to give anyone what they needed at that time. They may have believed you had moved on, but now they are beginning to question whether your silence was hiding feelings you never expressed. Sometimes the truth does not arrive as a dramatic confession. Sometimes it appears in one sentence, spoken by someone who never realized how much that sentence would change everything. And your soulmate may now be replaying that moment again and again, trying to understand what else they never knew. Because the conversation did not just reveal something about your circumstances. It may have revealed something about your heart. They may have discovered that you were affected by the separation far more deeply than you ever showed. They may have heard that you still cared, still remembered, or still carried feelings you never allowed yourself to express. And now your soulmate is beginning to understand that while they were believing you had forgotten them, you may have been silently carrying a completely different story. But the most painful part of what they overheard may be the realization that you never stopped caring as much as they thought. You simply stopped showing it because something inside your life, your heart, or your circumstances made it impossible to continue the way you once did. And now your soulmate is left wondering whether they misunderstood your silence from the very beginning. And now your soulmate is beginning to connect the pieces of a story they never knew they were part of. The conversation they overheard has not left their mind, because every new detail is forcing them to look back at the past differently. They may be remembering the exact moments when you became quieter, the conversations where your answers felt shorter, the times you seemed emotionally far away even when you were physically present, the moments when they believed you were choosing to distance yourself from them. But now they are asking a completely different question. What if your distance was never really about them? For a long time, your soulmate may have looked at your silence and created their own explanation. They may have thought you were losing interest. They may have believed someone else had your attention. They may have assumed you were tired of the connection, or simply decided that your feelings were no longer strong enough to keep you close. And because they did not know what was really happening behind the scenes, those assumptions slowly became their reality. But now, the truth they overheard is forcing them to question everything. Imagine watching someone walk away from you and believing they're leaving, because they no longer love you, only to discover later that they were carrying a weight so heavy they could barely breathe. That may be what your soulmate is beginning to understand about you. They thought you were walking away from them. You may have simply been trying to survive something they could not see. And the more they think about it, the more memories begin to change. A moment they once interpreted as coldness may now look like exhaustion. A delayed response they once took personally may now seem like the behavior of someone who was overwhelmed. A period of silence they believed was intentional may now appear connected to something happening in your life that you never knew how to explain. Your soulmate may be asking themselves whether you wanted to tell them the truth. Maybe you did. Maybe there were moments when you almost reached out, almost explained everything, almost admitted how much you were struggling. But then something stopped you. Perhaps you were afraid they would not understand. Perhaps you did not want their sympathy. Perhaps you had already become so accustomed to hiding your pain that opening up felt more frightening than staying silent. Or maybe you believed that by the time they finally understood, it would already be too late. Sometimes people do not hide what they feel because they do not care. They hide it because they care so much that being misunderstood would hurt even more. And your soulmate may now be realizing that your silence was not empty. There may have been an entire emotional world behind it. Feelings you never expressed, questions you never asked, pain you never shared, memories you never admitted still mattered. Sometimes the quietest person is carrying the loudest truth. Your soulmate may now be replaying every moment when they believed you had stopped caring and wondering whether they were wrong. They may remember how they reacted to you. Maybe they became distant in return. Maybe they stopped reaching out because they believed you had already made your decision. Maybe they tried to move on because they thought you had already moved on first. And now they are realizing that two people can be hurt at the same time, while each one believes they are the only one who cares. You were carrying your own hidden reality. They were carrying their interpretation of your silence. And because neither of you had the full truth, the distance continued to grow. But now your soulmate knows something they never knew before. They know that there was more happening inside your life than they ever understood. They know your behavior had a reason. They know your silence may have been hiding feelings rather than proving their absence. And this realization may be changing the way they see you completely. But as they continue thinking about what they overheard, another painful question may be beginning to rise inside them. If they had known the truth back then, would they have stayed instead of walking away? And now your soulmate may be beginning to feel the weight of everything they did not know. The conversation they overheard has created a completely different understanding of the past, and they may be looking back at their own actions with a level of regret they were not prepared to feel. For a long time, they may have believed they were responding to the reality of the situation. They saw you becoming distant, so they protected themselves. They noticed your silence, so they assumed you no longer cared. They felt you pulling away, so they decided there was no reason to keep trying. But now they are beginning to understand that they may have been reacting to only half of the truth. They saw the outside of your life, but they never knew what was happening inside it. They saw your behavior, but they never understood what caused it. And now they may be wondering whether everything could have been different if they had known what you were really going through. Imagine two people standing on opposite sides of a wall, both believing the other person walked away when the wall itself was built from everything neither of them knew how to say. That may be the realization your soulmate is facing now. They may be thinking about all the times they could have asked better questions, all the moments when they could have been more patient, all the opportunities when they could have stayed instead of assuming the worst. Perhaps they remember a conversation where they became angry because you did not explain yourself. Perhaps they remember deciding to stop reaching out because they believed you had already stopped caring. And now, after overhearing the truth, they may be wondering whether they gave up on you during the exact moment you needed understanding the most. This can create a deep kind of regret because your soulmate may realize that you were not necessarily asking them to solve your problems. Maybe you simply needed them to understand that there was more happening than what they could see. But when people do not know the hidden story, they often judge the visible behavior. They see the distance and call it rejection. They see the silence and call it indifference. They see the withdrawal and assume it means the feelings are gone. Your soulmate may now be realizing that they did exactly that with you, and this realization may be difficult for them to accept because they may have spent a long time believing they were the one who had been hurt. Now they are beginning to understand that you may have been hurting too. You may have been struggling in a way they never knew about while they were quietly creating a story about why you no longer wanted them. Sometimes the person you think is leaving you is the person waiting for someone to notice they are not okay. That truth may now be echoing inside your soulmate's mind. They may be wondering whether you ever wanted to explain yourself but simply did not know how. They may be questioning whether you still carry the same feelings or whether too much time has passed. And perhaps the most painful realization is that they may now understand why you stopped trying to make them understand. Maybe you became tired of explaining things nobody seemed willing to hear. Maybe you believed that if they truly wanted to know the truth, they would ask. Maybe you eventually accepted that some people will only understand your pain after they have already lost access to your life. And now your soulmate may be facing the consequences of that misunderstanding. They finally know more about your story, but they do not know whether they still have the right to ask you about it. They finally understand why you became distant, but they may be afraid that their understanding arrived after you had already learned how to live without being understood by them. And now your soulmate is left with a truth they can no longer unknow. They may have overheard only one conversation, but that conversation has changed the meaning of everything that happened between you. They now understand that your silence was not as simple as they once believed. They know there were things happening beneath the surface. They know you may have been carrying emotions, circumstances, or pain that you never allowed them to see. And perhaps the hardest part for them is realizing that while they were creating their own explanation for your distance, you were living through a reality they knew nothing about. They may now be looking back at the past and wondering how many times they misunderstood you. How many times did they believe you were rejecting them when you were actually struggling? How many times did they assume you did not care when you were simply unable to express what was happening inside you? And how many opportunities disappeared because both of you were reacting to a story that was never complete? Imagine discovering years later that the person you thought had closed the door on you had actually been standing behind it, waiting for something they never knew how to ask for. That may be the feeling your soulmate is experiencing now. They may want to reach out, but the truth has also made them afraid. They may wonder whether you would believe them if they said they finally understand. They may wonder whether you would even want to explain yourself now, because understanding something after the damage has been done can be painful. Your soulmate may now realize that they cannot simply return and expect everything to feel the same. They may have to acknowledge the assumptions they made. They may have to accept that they judged your silence without knowing the reason behind it. And they may have to face the possibility that you have already healed from the version of the connection that once caused you pain. Perhaps you once wanted them to ask what was wrong. Perhaps you once hoped they would look beyond your silence and realize that something deeper was happening. But after enough time passes, a person can stop waiting to be understood. They can learn to carry their own story without explaining it to anyone. And now, your soulmate may finally understand the truth at the exact moment you no longer need them to. Sometimes the truth arrives late, not because it was hidden forever, but because the person who needed to hear it was not ready to understand it before. Your soulmate overheard a conversation about you that was never meant for them. They heard something they were never supposed to know, and now they cannot look at the past in the same way again. They finally understand that your distance had a reason. They finally understand that your silence was hiding something deeper. They finally understand that you may have cared far more than you ever showed. But now they are left with the question that matters most. If they had known the truth back then, would they have stayed? Would they have fought for you? Would they have chosen to understand instead of assuming? And perhaps the most painful realization of all is that they will never know for certain, because the moment when they needed to know the truth has already passed.